Hello there friends, my name is Rachel GNS Middle, Gilbert and Sullivan is my middle name and my middle name is my last name. And I am here on behalf of Forbear Theatre to explore the magic of the Gilbert and Sullivan operas by very pedantically ranking every element of them. Today we are going to be ranking the soprano characters. By my count, there are 22 soprano roles. If I haven't included any that you think should be included, it's probably because I've put them in the chorus principal list. In making this list, I've given each character a mark out of 60. I've given them 20 points for music. I've given them 20 points for a combination of lyrics and spoken dialogue. The reason I've not put this into two categories of 10 marks is because some characters have no or barely any dialogue, so I feel like that wouldn't be very fair. I've also given them marks out of 10 for emotional complexity and marks out of 10 for enjoyment. This final category is a little bit subjective, but I do think it's important because some characters might lack a little bit of depth but actually just be enormously fun to play, and I think that is important. Frivolity does have its value, especially in the topsy-turvy world of Gilbert and Sullivan. Starting off with number 22, we have Kate from Yeomen, and I always feel bad when characters mark this low. She only got 20 out of 60, poor Kate, but sadly when you look at her in comparison to the other soprano characters, she really doesn't have too much to do, and what she does do is fine, but it's not particularly a big part of the story. She's a plot device really, and she's a beautiful soprano line in Strange Adventure, but all her marks were very low. She didn't score highly at all. I do appreciate though when directors do try and involve her in earlier and later scenes, so when they put her with Dame Carruthers, perhaps she's like there beside her writing things down. I always like it when parts like that are given a little bit more to do, but sadly when you look at Kate just with the material she has, it's not terribly strong. So even though I still love her because I love every character, Kate does come an absolute dead last for me. Number 21 is Nicemis from Thespis. It's impossible to mark any music from Thespis, but since the category is vitally important in ranking other characters, I do have to include it. What I've done usually in this scenario is I've looked at what kind of lyrics she's got, like what kinds of songs she's in, and then I've looked at other GNS operas that have similar songs, like similar vibes. So when I look at, for example, Here Far Away From All the World, which I'm going to be doing in my duet video next, I've looked at GNS's generic love duets between a tenor and soprano and thought, well, this probably isn't going to be the most exciting song that Sullivan's ever written. And apart from that love duet, she has a quintet, which is lovely. I've seen that set to music from Rose of Persia and that works really well. She doesn't have a whole lot of material musically, and her dialogue is kind of funny, but she's also quite mean as a character and sometimes for no reason. I think that's meant to be hilarious because her name is Nicemis and she's not very nice. But she's mean to characters that she has no business being mean to. She's horrible to Prettier. To her face as well, isn't it? It's not nice. Nicemis is not nice. But essentially, even though she is quite funny, she's not a particularly likeable or memorable character in my opinion, and so she doesn't rank particularly highly. Number 20 is the Princess of Monte Carlo from the Grand Duke. Now, she is a small part, so her scores are quite low. As a result of that, you can't give a character very high marks for music if she simply doesn't have very much music. But what she does have is very nice. Her dialogue is funny, and most importantly, she gets to be part of the chaotic endgame of the Grand Duke, which is just spectacular. And she is quite a memorable character, even if she doesn't have too much stage time. And despite this lack of stage time, she actually does have quite a good emotional arc. She gets to experience a lot of emotions in a very short amount of time. I played the Princess of Monte Carlo. I really enjoyed her. I gave her a 6 out of 10 for enjoyment because what she does have is great, but yeah, she doesn't really have too much to do in the rest of the operas. So for that reason, she comes quite low on the list, but I still think she is lovely. Number 19 is the Plaintiff, or Angelina, from Trial by Jury. She doesn't have as much material as some of the other characters, but nobody in Trial by Jury has too much material, and everybody in Trial by Jury is quite shallow. I love Trial by Jury. I think it's a great opera, but just because it's quite short, it does mean there's not really a chance to go into depth with any of these characters. And what we do know about Angelina, it seems you can play her in one of two ways. You can play her very straight, as in she really genuinely does feel these feelings for Edwin. And when she says, I love him, she genuinely means that. But then it's a bit one-dimensional and a bit wet. You can even play it as if she's trying to gain some financial reward from Edwin, which I find a bit old-fashioned and maybe slightly problematic. Not problematic enough that it impacts my enjoyment of it, but it's not a character I'm particularly interested in playing, like that conniving, jilted bride who's trying to get back at her fiance. I don't find that particularly funny or interesting, but hey, it's fun, and I played Angelina and she's a great little role. But ultimately just not as complex or enjoyable as some of the characters above her. Number 18 I've given to Lady Psyche from Princess Ida. I've never played Lady Psyche. I think I'd have a lot of fun playing her, mostly because of her song O Lady Fair of Lineage High, which I love. I also like her material in the opening of Act 2, You Shall Get Them Boulderized. I gave her a 13 out of 20 for music. I think what she does have is lovely, and even if she doesn't have lots of solo material, she gets to be part of the Act 2 finale of Princess Ida, which is one of the highlights for me of all of the canon. She does fall down, I think, on her dialogue. She doesn't have much dialogue, and what she does have isn't particularly funny or memorable. The lines aren't particularly connected to her as a character. They don't really tell us too much about who she is. I think there is scope there, and I think as an actor you can make a lot of interesting choices to bring her to life, but the material you have to work with I don't think is particularly strong. I have given her a 7 out of 10 for enjoyment. I would love to play her, as I say. Other parts I think are just better. Number 17 I have given to Constance from The Sorcerer. This one surprised me with how low she fell in the list, but I've checked the marks compared to those below and above her, and I do think she's in the right place. She has lovely music. Her songs are funny and clever and musically interesting. Her dialogue is okay, not the best, but certainly not the worst. Where Constance falls down for me is her part in the story. I don't think that Gilbert really thought too carefully about Constance as a character. At the start, she makes it really clear who she is and what she wants. But then that story is never resolved. I think it would have behooved Gilbert to bookend that and have some kind of resolution for her and Dr. Daly, rather than them just, oh, you're all together now, okay. I don't find that very satisfying. And often when you bring up problems like this in the Gilbert and Sullivan community, you'll get people saying, oh, well, it's topsy-turvy, it's not meant to make sense. But no, let's hold Gilbert to a higher standard, because he does write incredible characters and he's given them incredible through lines and arcs. But this one, he has dropped the ball on, when we have to just admit that to ourselves. It does really tarnish Constance as a character for me. It does mean that when you play her, by the end, because you don't get that resolution, I think it leaves the audience believing she wasn't terribly important, and it is really unsatisfying as an actor. For that reason, I've only given her 6s for emotional complexity and enjoyment. Some people may put her a little higher for that, but the thing is, even if I'd given her 7s, she still wouldn't have beaten the person above her. The person above her is 5 marks higher than her, so I cannot justify giving her extra marks in places, really. I don't think she deserves them. And that is sad, because I do love this part and I have played this part, but this is a problem with this character and it is a shame. And I would love to see somebody have a go at rewriting that and maybe giving her character a proper resolution. Number 15 I've given to Princess Zara from Utopia Limited. Obviously, her music is incredible. I gave her a 19 out of 20 for music, and she deserves every single one of those points. The only reason I didn't give her a 20 is because I think there are some characters whose music is a little better than hers. Lyrics and dialogue, however, not so much. The dialogue in Utopia Limited isn't the strongest. I think we can all agree on that. And what dialogue is good is not said by Princess Zara. Her lines don't really tell us who she is as a character. She isn't really part of the story, which is so strange when you think about it, because she is the lead soprano. She should be a major part of this story, but she's come back from England. She's introducing these people. You think, for one fleeting moment, you think, oh, she has a conflict because Scapio and Fantis are after her. But then that just gets resolved immediately and it's never brought up again. And then she does come in at the end and save the day, but you don't see any part of that distress before she comes in and saves the day. She doesn't really have any conflict or any true emotional arc. You get to see her in love with somebody, but that's it. It's not terribly satisfying. I don't have any particular desire to play Princess Zara. I mean, I'd give her a go. If somebody would like me to play Princess Zara, I would like that. That would be nice. She doesn't have nearly as much scope as even some of the characters below her, I don't think, and certainly not as much as the characters above her. But, you know, I still gave her a 7 out of 10 for enjoyment because she gets to be on stage a lot of the time. She gets to sing in Knightsbridge Nursemaids, which is really fun. The Act 1 finale is good with all those guys coming in. She does get to have a good time. She's just not that great of a character, in my opinion. Numbers 14 and 13, I have combined these characters into two because they are the same character, are Princess Nekaya and Princess Kalyba, also from Utopia Limited. I've actually ranked these characters above Princess Zara. They get a 17 out of 20 for music. What music they do have is amazing. They get Although with Native Maids the Cream, and they get Then I May Sing and Play, which is lovely. They also get to be in, you know, the Act 1 finale, Eagle High, Knightsbridge Nursemaids. Actually, I think Knightsbridge Nursemaids they're not officially meant to be in, but I imagine most directors would probably put them into it. I've given them a 6 out of 10 for emotional complexity, which is more than Princess Zara gets, because they actually do have inner conflicts. You can see that they really want to behave and do as they're told, but at the same time, they want to sing and play. And when they get released and given the permission to be who they want to be, that is somewhat emotionally gratifying. So I do appreciate that. And that moment for me has much more value than anything that Princess Zara does. And that's why I think they rank a little bit higher than she does. They're also just enormously fun characters to play. They have really good dialogue. We don't like it. At least we do like it, but it's wrong. And also it's just lovely to be in a double act with somebody. I am still really close friends with the person who played Kalyba when I was Nekaya. We've worked together lots of times since, and I consider her to be a really good friend. And we built that relationship largely because we were playing so closely on stage together. So that was just a really nice experience to have. It's nice to work that closely with somebody. Number 13 goes to Lisa from The Grand Duke. First of all, I've given her a 16 out of 20 for music. Even though Lisa doesn't have a huge amount of solo, and her aria in Act 2 is probably one of the weakest numbers of The Grand Duke, if you look at all of her musical material that she has, there's a lot more than maybe you'd think offhand. She gets that wonderful opening with Ludwig, she gets the quintets in Act 1, she has wonderful material in the Act 1 finale, Oh Listen to Me, Dear, and The Die Is Cast. She is a hugely emotionally valuable part of this show. The only reason she's not higher is because she isn't terribly complex as a character. Her one defining characteristic is how much she loves Ludwig, and when somebody's character is only defined by their relationship to somebody else, it's not terribly satisfying or meaningful. Having said that, I would love to play Lisa in The Grand Duke. I think there's a lot you can do with her. She's certainly got a lot of scope as a character, and just beautiful music, and you get to be part of the principal ensemble of The Grand Duke, and that is value in itself. Number 12 is Casilda from the Gondoliers. Casilda wasn't a part I knew anything about until I played her just this last summer, and I did have more fun than I thought I did. Casilda is a lovely part. She does have her issues. She is missing for quite a lot of it, so it means that when you come back on in the middle of Act 2, I imagine a lot of people have kind of forgotten who she is and the emotional importance of her connection with Lewis. But that is a lovely emotional connection, and that section she gets from the ducal party entrance until the end of Try Very Lifelong is beautiful. And had that just been the whole opera, she'd be one of the best parts in the canon, because that is wonderful music to sing. I had such enormous fun doing all of those numbers. And even though she does spend a lot of her Act 2 watching other people do things and just being a person who things happen to, it is still really fun to be on stage for the Duke and Duchess section and to react to that. And for anyone who watched the introduction video, you'll know that I didn't like the song Here's a Case Unprecedented before this summer, but now I thought it was great. That was so much fun to do. I had lots of fun choreographing it as well. So I love Casilda's material. She does have a lot to do, but ultimately, again, there's not really much more to her than just being a person who's in love with a person who maybe she shouldn't be in love with. But then it turns out he actually is the person she should have been in love with after all. You can kind of glean a few things about her. She's obviously intelligent, she's quite cutting with Lewis, and she certainly knows how to joke and have a bit of fun, but I don't think in the Gondoliers you really get to the crux of who any of these characters are, because they simply don't have enough stage time. But Casilda, yeah, liked her, good character, just maybe not as complex as some of the others. I gave her a 7 out of 10 for enjoyment. A lot of them get 7 out of 10s for enjoyment. Nice character. Might play again. Number 11 I've given to Aline from The Sorcerer. Her music's okay. 15 out of 20 for music. She has a lot of it, which is why the score was so high. We'll get to this in the Soprano arias video, but I don't think that Oh Happy Young Heart and Alexis Doubt Me Not My Loved One are particularly good arias when looked at against the other soprano arias. But she has some lovely material. In the Act 1 finale, she gets a quintet. Moment with Dr. Daly is one of the highlights for me in that show. I could not help it. That little section now. That feels very emotionally intense for me, and for me as a person who likes to be dramatic on stage, I think I'd quite enjoy that bit. She does get pretty high marks across the board. The issue with Aline is a little bit like the issue with Lisa, really. She doesn't have too much character in herself. You more see her as Alexis's partner. Alexis is a very complex character, but Aline is mostly just reacting to things he's said, and you don't really get too much of a sense of who she is, at least not as much as you get of some of the characters further up. I did give her a 9 out of 10 for emotional complexity, because even though it's not exactly clear who she is as a character, she certainly gets the scope to be extremely emotional all the way through the opera. She gets to be frightened, she gets to be at the very pinnacle of earthly joy, she gets to be distressed, she gets to be fearful that she's lost Alexis, she gets to be fearful of Alexis. There's a lot that she gets to go through, and I think as an actor I would have a good time. I gave her an 8 out of 10 for enjoyment. I think there are some characters that are a bit more enjoyable than her, but all in all, good going, Aline. We are now on to the top 10 soprano characters. Number 10 I've given to a character who I'm surprised wasn't higher, but then when I look at the marks I've given her and the marks I've given her characters just below and above her, I don't see how she could have been any higher than this, really. Number 10 is Mabel from The Pirates of Penzance. Lovely music, given her a 16 out of 20 for music. Pirates of Penzance just isn't quite as advanced musically as some of the later operas, but it's still lovely. I've only given her a 14 out of 20 for lyrics and dialogue, and that is extremely generous considering she only has certainly less than 10 lines, but 6 or 7 lines, I think. I've given her an 8 for emotional complexity. Like a lot of these GNS characters, you do have to put your own spin on the character, which is fun, and I do like doing that. But there isn't too much material to work with. Like other characters in the Pirates of Penzance, Mabel is very concerned with doing the right thing and doing her duty. And you don't really know why it is that she likes Frederick. The ladies' chorus give us the idea that it's because he's beautiful, but perhaps there is more to it than that. I love Mabel. I've played her quite a few times, as recently as a few weeks ago, and she is one of my absolute favourite characters to play. I love Poor Wandering One. That duet section she gets with Frederick in Act 2 is incredibly emotionally cathartic. I do enjoy that. The section with the sergeant is very funny. I really love Mabel as a part, but I don't think she is as complex as some of the characters above her. I don't think the music she gets to sing is as good as some of the characters above her, which is a big shame because I do love her, but I think it's important to be very fair and not bring my biases into it. So I'm sorry you're only number 10, Mabel. I still love you and I would play you every day if I could. Number 9 I have given to Gianetta from the Gondoliers. I think when I look at Gianetta and Mabel, I probably would prefer to play Gianetta because even though she doesn't have as much emotional value as Mabel does, she doesn't go on as crazy of a journey as Mabel does. The material that Gianetta gets to do is just so interesting. If you just think about the amount of material Gianetta has, the opening, Kind Sir, You Cannot Have the Heart, all of the Act 1 finale, which includes Regular Royal Queen, in a contemplative fashion, after sailing to this island, and the aforementioned Here is a Case Unprecedented, she does have an awful lot to do. Oh, and that quartet she has in the Act 1 finale, Oh Marco dear, My Wish is Clear While You're Away, it's just gorgeous. And I think that for music and lyrics alone, she deserves a slightly higher spot than Mabel, really. Even if, like with the other Gondoliers characters, you don't really get to know who she is. It's largely up to the actor how they play Gianetta, which is perfectly fine. I've given her an 8 out of 10 for enjoyment, simply because I imagine it would be hugely fun to play Gianetta. When I was Casilda, I was very jealous of the amount of dancing the quartet got to do, so that's definitely a part I'd like to play one day. Number 8 goes to Phyllis from Iolanthe. This is another part that I've played several times, and every time I play her I find something a little bit new. I find a different way of playing her. She has a lot of scope, but she's also very interesting in herself if you look at the material she has. I gave her a 15 out of 20 for music. It is lovely, the material she has, but since she has not got a complete aria in her own right, I don't think she deserves quite as high a musical score as some of the others. I did give her an 18 out of 20 for lyrics and dialogue. I think her lyrics are lovely and her dialogue is some of the funniest in the canon. The 2 scenes she has as Strephon are, as an actor, some of my absolute favourite scenes in the canon to do. And I really appreciate that Gilbert was giving funny lines to women, which he doesn't always do. Which half? But she also does have emotional value too. The reason I think she is a bit lower than some of the other characters is because she is slightly more shallow. Even though she's obviously distressed that she's lost Strephon, she doesn't seem terribly distressed. When you see how Elsie reacts to the announcement that Fairfax is still alive, and then compare that to Phyllis's reaction to Strephon, you can really see that some characters are given more emotional scope. Phyllis's reactions are not as extreme, and she doesn't seem too put out about having to marry either Tallulah or Mountara either, which is absolutely fine. Again, I think it depends how she's played. There's a lot of scope to play her in several different ways. Ultimately, she isn't as complex, I think, as some of the other characters. Number 7 goes to Patience from Patience. I have played Patience before. I really enjoy playing her. I think she's got lovely music. I gave her a 17 out of 20 for music. She's got really funny dialogue. I would say, though, that her dialogue is not as good as Phyllis's dialogue. I think that even though she's in very funny scenes, and that section where she's rebuffing Grosvenor, like, advance at your peril, that's very funny. In other scenes, it seems like she's setting up jokes that Bunthorne and Grosvenor have more than being funny in her own right, which is a little bit of a shame, because when she is funny, she's very funny. I gave her an 8 out of 10 for enjoyment. I only gave her a 7 out of 10 for emotional complexity. And the reason I did that is because it is kind of hard to get a handle on who she is as a character. That about turn she does at the end when Grosvenor comes on and she decides, oh, well, I'll marry you after all. Even though it does work somewhat logically in Gilbert's very topsy-turvy view of what love is, it doesn't make very much emotional sense, and it's a bit unsatisfying as an actor and also just difficult. It's not easy to make that change in yourself, especially after that hugely emotional section with Grosvenor and the subsequent Lovers of Plaintiff song. A lot of Gilbert's plots do end up like that, and that is totally part of the charm of the operas, and I'm a big fan of that. But Patience as a character really does take the brunt of that abrupt change, and it is hard as an actor to do that, which is maybe the reason why she's a little bit further down than some of the characters above her. But hey, she is number 7 out of 22, so she has done very well. Well done, Patience, well done. Number 6 I have given to the soprano character in The Mikado, whose name I'm not going to say. If you want to know why, you can look at my introduction video to this whole series. I love this character. I've played her twice, and both times I had such a good time with her. I gave her a 16 out of 20 for music. I don't think her music is maybe quite as good as some of the others, but it is still pretty strong. It's hard to sing, though. I think her aria is the hardest out of any of them. Hers and Kind Sir, those are 2 really difficult soprano arias, especially for my voice. I find those hard. I gave her an 18 out of 20 for lyrics and dialogue. Her dialogue scenes are some of my favourites in the canon. I think she is so funny. About on a level with Phyllis. I love these 2 characters. I only gave her a 6 out of 10 for emotional complexity, because even though she is in this really distressing life or death situation, she doesn't really seem to care so much about it, considering the torment that she is going through. And this isn't a problem, because I also gave her a 10 out of 10 for enjoyment. Like, that's how much I enjoy playing this character. But it does seem like she has been made to be a bit shallow, and that's where part of the humour comes from with her. It seems like the characters in The Mikado have been specifically designed to be shallow in order to get the most comedy out of them possible. And I love how that works. And I love the symbiosis of all the characters in The Mikado. They work together really well as an ensemble, but they are a little bit more shallow than some other characters in the canon. But when you think about some of the characters that I haven't talked about yet, or even some of the characters I have talked about, her emotional journey just isn't as rich or complex as some of theirs. But I do really enjoy playing her, and that's why she's so high up on my list. Number 5 I've given to Josephine from HMS Pinafore. She gets a 17 out of 20 for music. I'm not such a fan of Sorry Her Lot. I think there's not too much you can do with that as an actor, and I don't think that's a bit of the show that people particularly look forward to. But I really do like her second act aria, and she's got wonderful material in the Act 1 finale. And that bit that she gets to do with Rafe about daring to raise his wormy eyes, to me, like, that is one of the moments in the canon where I'm like, there should be a wind machine on stage. They should be standing there hand in hand and like just giving the captain the piece of their mind. I love that bit. So when it comes to emotional complexity, she gets a 9. When it comes to enjoyment, she gets a 9. I love this character. She does fall slightly below some of the others on lyrics and dialogue. I don't think Gilbert's very early work was quite as good as some of his later work, and especially in terms of dialogue. She has some funny lines, but if you think about Phyllis's lines, she's not as funny of a character, but she's certainly not shallow. That's one thing you can say about Josephine, and that's why she's so high on this list. I would love to play this part one day. It's on my bucket list of GNS roles I simply must play at some point before I die. Maybe she falls down slightly because her opera isn't quite as long as the others. But the difference between Josephine and some of the other characters like Lisa or Aline is that you really do get a sense of who Josephine is. You really get to understand her as a character, how much dignity she has, but that she's also willing to have a little bit of fun as well. She has really solid principles like Mabel, but unlike Mabel, she actually logically works through them and thinks with her head as well as her heart. She has a whole song about this emotional conflict. The Ausgriffon Pace is an absolute gift of an aria, but I'll talk about that in a later video. But all in all, Josephine is a cracking character. I would love to play her. Number 4, I have given to Rose Maybud from Ruddigore. I think that Rose Maybud would have been higher had it not been for the fact that she barely appears in Act 2. I gave her a 17 out of 20 for music. I gave her a 19 out of 20 for lyrics and dialogue. Think about the dialogue scenes that Rose Maybud has got. She's got that scene with Dick Dauntless. She's got the scene with Mad Margaret. She's got a really funny scene with Robin just before I Know a Youth. Her material is out of this world. But it's the dialogue that I'd really want to do when it comes to Rose. I don't think her musical material is maybe as good as some of the other characters. As a character, she is hugely complex. She's got all these neuroses that involve her being abandoned as a baby. And this book of etiquette was her only possession. So her entire life is just ruled by this book. And you can see that there's a part of her fighting to get out, but she's continually suppressing this part of herself. And that's so interesting as an actor to do that, because it is dark when you think about it. It's actually extremely tragic, her circumstances. But in Gilbert's typical way, he's found an immense amount of joy in this tragic backstory, and she turns into this really funny character as a result of these neuroses that she's got. And she's also quite smug and stuck up, but bizarrely in a way that's likeable. You really warm to her as a character. You see her disappointment when she realises that Robin did want to marry her. And even though her decisions that drive her picking Robin over Dick Dauntless are somewhat shallow, you could tell there's more to it than what she's saying. You can tell that she's just saying these reasons because she has this enormous amount of tension inside of her. And I think it would be really fun as an actor to portray that. And for that reason, she's as high as she is. But she does fall down for just this lack of proper resolution at the end of the opera. It's not quite as bad as Constance. She doesn't get left out entirely. But it's not particularly satisfying when your arc as a character doesn't match the narrative arc of the opera. She appears in Act 2. Her story is kind of on pause. Then she comes back and it does get resolved, but it's not particularly satisfying. So we are down to the top 3. Now, initially, these 3 parts all got the same mark. But you can't have a 3-way tie. I had to check myself, check my own biases, and really challenge myself to put these into order. They were still a few points above Rose Maybud, so she wouldn't have factored in no matter what I did. But this was tremendously difficult for me to do. Number 3, I have given to Julia Jellicoe from the Grand Duke. And even just saying she's number 3 to me feels like sacrilege because she's probably my favourite part in the entire canon. However, when you really think about her as a character, she does have a few downsides. I gave her a 20 out of 20 for music. 100% deserved. I gave her an 18 out of 20 for dialogue. I do not think her dialogue is quite as clever or interesting as Rose's dialogue, or maybe even Phyllis's dialogue, but it is very funny. She has some really funny lines. Whenever I've played Julia, I've done it with a German accent, and who doesn't love an accent? I gave her a 9 out of 10 for enjoyment and an 8 out of 10 for emotional complexity. These are the 2 categories where she loses a few marks purely for the reason that, much like Rose Maybud, her character arc doesn't really match the narrative arc of the opera. She is not the main part of this opera, Ludwig is. And as an actor, you want to be the star of the show, or at least you want to feel like your story is resolved when the story of the opera is. Even though she agrees to marry Ernest right at the end of the show, to me her story is wrapped up at the end of In the Light of Love's Lingering Embers. If anything, it's kind of awkward coming on stage and standing there during the roulette song and all of that business, because you feel like, wow, I was such a big part of this opera and now I'm just standing here. And that's fine, you know, I'm not a selfish actor. I will give other actors their moment, but there are characters that aren't standing around, which I'll talk about next. So I felt that because of that, as much as it pains me, because I think that Julia is a spectacular part to play, like that monologue she gets to do in the middle of Oh Julia Come, and her second act aria, So Ends My Dream, alone they are just worth playing the part 1,000 times over. I love playing that part. I find it hugely emotional. She is complex as a character, and what she wants isn't a man. What she wants is the biggest part. What she wants is fame, notoriety. She wants what is rightfully hers to have. So even though I do love all these elements of Julia, I do have to confess that as a character, she's maybe not as well crafted as the two that I've yet to talk about. Part of the reason for that is because Julia wasn't meant to be a character in this opera. I've been reading all about this in the wonderful score by Mark Sheppard, which has this extensive introduction to the history of the Grand Duke. And when the story was initially plotted, Julia wasn't even part of it, but she was later kind of shoehorned into it. Even though he did a really good job, and she's certainly very important in the story now, you can see that in hindsight. You can see that maybe she was never meant to be part of the main story, and as a result, her character isn't maybe quite as satisfying. But having said that, she probably remains to be my favourite to play. But then, I haven't really played the two characters above her, so let's talk about them. Number 2, I've given to Elsie Maynard from the Yeomen of the Guard. I have played Elsie before, but it was a very small university concert production. I'd like to play her again with a bit more rehearsal time. I'm also quite a bit older now than I was when I played her, and I've got a bit more of an idea of how to get the most out of her. I gave her a 20 out of 20 for music, like Julia. Incredible music. Her aria is beautiful. Leonard, My Loved One, is beautiful. The ensemble numbers just at the end there, When a Wooer Goes a Wooing and A Man Who Would Woo a Fair Maid. A lot of people don't like I Have a Song to Sing Oh, and I think really if we look at it on its own, it's probably not the strongest song, but the emotional value it has when it's brought back at the end, I think makes it worth it. As a character, her emotional arc is incredible, and there's also lots of scope with her as a character. You can choose as an actor / director if you want Elsie to actually be in love with Jack Point, if you want her to actually be a bit disgusted by Jack Point or feeling sorry for him, even though I don't think her character, i.e. her wants and needs, are maybe as well developed as Rose Maybud or Julia or the character above her. But she just has so much scope to be almost anything the actor and director want her to be. And she's part of such a glorious story with so many wonderful characters around her. But what we do know about Elsie is that she's part of a comedic duo. She can sing and dance. She's quick-witted. She thinks on her feet. She's able to manipulate situations to her advantage. She's obviously very clever. She has such a lovely back and forth with Fairfax, where you think she is succumbing to his charms because she's this frail woman, but in the end she really bites back at him and says, "How dare you say this to me? Is this how soldiers speak to young girls?" And well done, Elsie. I love that bit of you, and I think she's just spectacular. Such a good example. I think a lot of soprano characters are seen as quite vapid, but Elsie's clearly got this emotional depth. You can see throughout the whole opera that even though her decisions don't drive a lot of the plot, the way in which she reacts to events around her really show her depth as a character. I did direct it quite recently, and I had the privilege of having this wonderful actor playing Elsie, and she really brought the character to life to me in a way that I didn't know it could be. And Elsie is a really important part of that opera, and for that reason I gave her number 2. Now we move on to number 1 of the GNS soprano characters. Number 1 I've given to a character who I never thought would be this high, who I didn't think I ever wanted to play because of the problems I have with this opera, but who I've recently come to believe is probably the character I would most like to play, and the character who resonates most with me emotionally. And that character is Princess Ida from Princess Ida. Again, I've given her a 20 out of 20 for music. I don't think there are any quibbles there. Minerva, I Built Upon a Rock, To Yield at Once to Such a Foe in the Act 2 finale. I gave her a 9 out of 10 for emotional complexity. I do think she could have been given a 10, but there is just a little bit of confusion of how you deal with the final scene. I'm not particularly comfortable about that either. So I thought I'd just dock a point, because I feel like there needs to be something done about that, because I don't like the way she just gives in at the end. And I don't think she does either. That doesn't really ring true to me. And I think that was maybe Gilbert just not giving enough weight to the issues in this opera. But a 9 out of 10 is still very good. 10 out of 10 for enjoyment. I only gave her an 18 out of 20 for lyrics and dialogue. She does have beautiful lyrics and beautiful dialogue. The only reason I maybe docked a couple of marks is because she's not very funny. She's not very witty in the way that Phyllis or the soprano character from the Mikado are. So even though I do appreciate her lyrics and dialogue, I think other characters' dialogue is just a bit cleverer, really. Ultimately, I would just absolutely love to play this part, because the issues in Princess Ida are something that I really resonate with. And although it's really tempting to think today that feminism isn't particularly relevant anymore, or that we're not suffering anymore as a result of being born female, these issues do still really resonate with people. And when I think about how much catharsis I would get as an actor of playing out that arc of starting off being really idealistic and bright and being so happy that all these women have come to me to learn what I know, and then to watch that collapse around me, I feel like that would be enormously fun to play. Mind I say, I think even more fun than playing Julia. When it comes to emotional value, her place in the narrative, her music, I think that she does just tick all those boxes, and to me that does make her overall the best soprano character in the Gilbert and Sullivan canon. Thank you so much for watching my ranking of the Gilbert and Sullivan soprano characters. I hope that even if you haven't agreed with where I've ranked the characters, that you still enjoyed the video. Please let me know in the comments what you think. Let me know of your experiences of playing some of the characters I haven't played, or tell me if you disagree, if you agree, or if you have anything else to say. I'd love to hear it. Please press like, please press subscribe, and I will see you for the next one.